that this will be on Facebook Live. You can come back to see it there, but also we will have it recorded and we'll have it on Warwick's YouTube channel as well. So there's lots of ways to be able to see this. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Warwick's and then I'll get into the program this evening. So Warwick's is an independent bookstore for those of you that are joining us from either the Mission Viejo Library area or maybe even from Nashville, Tennessee, where Laura is from. Warwick's is an independent bookstore in La Jolla in San Diego, California. We are not the oldest bookstore in the country, but we are the oldest continuously family-owned bookstore in the country. So Nancy Warwick's great-great-grandfather started this in 1896, as my sign says there, in Minnesota. And he was, I was on an event earlier today and I said he was a smart man. He moved to La Jolla in the 30s. And so we've been in the building that we're at since the 50s. So we are definitely a San Diego legacy. So we have do wonderful author events. We have been open for business since the end of May, since the governor in California let retail open. Masks, social distancing. So if you are in the San Diego area and you want to come and browse books, that's fantastic. But like I always like to say too, any way that there is to get a book, you can get it from Warwick's. You can get it online, you can call us, we'll ship it to you. Tonight, I'm going to be putting Laura's book into the chat so you can easily just order it there. And so that's about Warwick's. And I'm just so excited that we have this partnership with Mission Viejo Library because we started talking about this partnership at least a year or more ago. And this is our second or third event that we've done together. And it's really been fun to kind of, do these virtual things and bring the Warwick's customers and the Mission Viejo patrons these wonderful events. So I'm going to start the program and turn it over to Allison and Laura. Laura's going to do a demo. There's ways for you to participate. You can put your questions or comments into the chat. And if you have a question about what Laura's doing, go ahead and put that in there too. And I'll try and pop that in to get your questions answered in as real time as possible. So with that, Allison Tran is the Senior Librarian for Children's Services at the Mission Viejo Library. She's enthusiastic about early literacy and loves to connect readers with books they won't be able to put down. I always love to do that. Allison reviews books and apps for School Library Journal and is active in the California Library Association. So with that, I'm going to turn the conversation over to you, Laura and Allison, and we'll be back in about a half hour or so.
All right. Well, thank you, Julie. I'm so excited to be partnering with Warwick's Books on this amazing event. I love Warwick's. I always mention that I grew up in San Diego, so Warwick's is like one of my home bookstores that I love so much. So very excited to be here and hosting this amazing author who I will introduce in just a moment. But first, for those of you who may be still joining us, I want to share a little bit about what's happening at the Mission Viejo Library lately. We just yesterday, in fact, reopened to the public in a limited capacity, which is pretty momentous for us because we had been closed since March, and we are now open by reservation, and it's really exciting. So if you guys are in the area, if you're watching this right now, you can hop on our website for all the details. We're open certain days of the week, like 3 days of the week, we take reservations. And then the other days, 2 days a week, we do our curbside service. So we have a variety of ways to serve people. And of course, follow us on Facebook because we're doing actually a lot of virtual programs like this one, and also some story times for kids. And we've done trivia and bingo, and you never know what we're going to do next. So definitely follow us on Facebook for all the fun. Now, let me go ahead and introduce our fabulous author tonight. So based in her hometown of Nashville, which is where she is now, Laura Lee is a certified holistic chef, and she's also a consultant and the founder, writer, and photographer of the popular website llbalanced.com. She teaches cooking classes and consults with individuals, corporations, and restaurants on all aspects of healthy eating and nutrition while contributing articles and recipes for publications such as Mind Body Green, Nashville Lifestyles, Southern Living, and Shape. So like she's got a pretty full plate. Laura, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm so excited to hear like how you get it all done. And I'm really, really looking forward to these recipes you're going to demo for us. So please take it away.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me. This is so much fun. I wish we were all in person, but I still love any opportunity to connect and just get the energy of everyone and do a little cooking together. So I'm so grateful for the opportunity. And when we were thinking about the recipes we were going to do, I decided, even though we're in different parts of the country, to do something kind of fall inspired from my recent cookbook, Simply Laura Lee. So we are going to be making my crash-free hot chocolate, which is kind of a keto-friendly hot chocolate, and that's a little bit of a buzzword, which we can totally talk about. But I like that for people because it is a great way to start the day without, too much of a jolt. And then we're also going to be making my grain-free chai-spiced donuts. So that's a lot of fun and really easy, really customizable.
I love the sound of all of this. I eat gluten-free, so I am super into these grain-free donuts. And gosh, crash-free hot chocolate just sounds so good. So while you're demoing the recipes as well, we're going to talk a little bit about your journey, especially as a cookbook author, because it's so great. You've made the leap from all the other things you do to having a published cookbook, and two, because Simply Laura Lee is your second cookbook. So this is all really exciting. So tell us a little bit about, first of all, just your journey to becoming a holistic chef, and how this all got started. You were in New York.
I know it's been a little bit of the spaghetti tactic of throwing everything against the wall, but it got started. I honestly think in childhood. My mom is an amazing cook. She is a better cook than I will ever be. And we had family dinners every single night. And I think that on the back burner, I started to associate cooking with community and family and comfort and all of those things. And then it wasn't a big part of my life until I graduated from the University of Virginia and went to New York. And it was a little bit of an oil and vinegar situation when I got to New York. It wasn't the best fit for me. And I had thought I was going to be a city girl and I was going to love it. And I had a tough time there. I really did. I thought I was going to be a lawyer, and I realized that wasn't what I wanted to do. And cooking ended up becoming my therapy, and going to the farmers markets instead of going out all the time and all the things I've been doing for a while. And so the more I cooked, the more my anxiety got better, just the happier I was. And I really felt like the connection between food and your mental and emotional health was something that people weren't talking about enough. And so I realized that I wanted to share that message in particular in whatever form that would take.
Well, I love that. And that's so relevant for this year, especially because we all need those forms of self-care. And pretty much, if we didn't have anxiety before, we probably have anxiety now, right? So, I mean, doing those things that can make us happier and then nourishing our bodies. So if it's cooking, bonus. That's so neat. So when about, like, how long ago was that?
So that was from 2008 to 2013. And I Googled healthy cooking schools one day in 2012, I believe. And I found the Natural Gourmet Institute, which is where I ended up going to culinary school. It's a specialized school that does offer an accredited chef's training program, but you also learn food and healing. So I enrolled, and the rest is kind of history. But I knew I wanted to move back to Nashville. I didn't want to move back until I had some idea of what I was going to do. So I graduated and started my business and sort of did a little bit of everything until I realized that the recipe development, the writing, the photography, that was kind of where my heart and soul is.
I love it when people find exactly what they want to do. That's like such a satisfying kind of story to hear. And so from there, I mean, you developed your website and everything. So what was the journey to getting published like?
Oh boy. So I'll go ahead and start throwing our donuts together while I kind of chat about that. So I'll let you guys know a little bit of what I'm doing. So first things first, I've measured out some of our dry ingredients, and this is a traditional baked good where we're going to have our dry, our wet, and then we're going to combine those together. So we have a mixture of blanched almond flour and coconut flour, and I find that that's a nice grain-free combination that seems to soak up a little bit of liquid because almond flour has more moisture in it, so the coconut flour helps kind of suck up some of that extra moisture to get a more traditional, wheat flour based absorption and consistency. So we have this combination here. And then I have our spices, which is very important. We're going to get a little bit of the spice from the chai tea itself, but I wanted to add more. So this is a combination of cinnamon, nutmeg, and ginger. And I'll go ahead and add that in. And then we have baking soda, baking powder, and sea salt. And I will say I have found with grain-free baking, using the combination of the baking soda and the baking powder is really, really useful because the baking soda does require a little bit of an acid, but you don't want too much of it because then it will start to get kind of a baking soda consistency. Whereas the baking powder contains that acid in it. So I like to combine those, and then let's get a whisk, and then salt, of course, to balance everything out. And so we'll just kind of mix that up, and then I will set that aside. So the book process, I've always considered myself a writer as much as anything. I love to write, and I had always dreamed of writing a book. I didn't know what that book would be. But when I started this journey, it was definitely a pipe dream to write a cookbook one day. But the truth is, when I did end up getting my first publishing deal, I didn't think I was ready for it. I just kind of got lucky. It was a little bit of an anomaly. I just got introduced to my publisher, really. But a friend had published a book with them, and they were growing and I was growing, and it was just a really, really good fit. And they basically gave me a lot of creative license to do what I wanted to do. And I asked if I could do my own photography. So we kind of built it together, but we came up with a really beautiful structure. And I knew it was also really important for me to include a lot of the nutrition information as well. So I have in both of my books, a very robust chapter 1. And I always encourage people to kind of take a look at that first before they dive into the meat of the recipes. But for me, it was kind of an unusual start. And it's just so funny because I went into it and I had my outline and I thought, I can do this. And you just can't even imagine how much it teaches you, and the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into it and all of that. So it was life-changing. I mean, it really, really was.
I bet. Well, so okay, your first cookbook was published in 2017. Now it's 2020. Your second one just came out. What were some of the differences in writing your first one where you were like learning all the ropes, and then your second one? And let's throw a pandemic into the mix.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Wow. Yeah. The things that you cannot predict and plan for. So as soon as sort of the book tour of my first book died down and I had a moment's rest, I decided I wanted to write another book. And I just loved it that much. And so I worked with my same publisher, and I decided that I did not want to wildly reinvent the wheel with my second book. A lot of people, and I think this is fabulous to do, will do a theme after their first book. They'll do a baking, holiday theme, or just something that's a little bit more specific. And I didn't want to do that. So I basically asked my publisher, can I essentially write a new book with all new but very similar content that meets the same needs that the first book seems to meet, the family friendly, freezer friendly, comfort food inspired, using the same pantry staples, that kind of thing. But there are some smaller themes in this book, and both of these recipes I think are good examples of that. There's some smaller themes. So for example, with this book, I have some of these kind of keto friendly recipes. And again, that's a little bit of a buzzword. So I try to be careful about it, but I do think there is something to be said for you know, a lot of people are interested in it. And I think it's something that, you know, when done correctly can be a great way to balance your blood sugar. And so I was more than happy to play around with that. Some sugar-free substitutes. Oh my goodness, my cat, apologies.
I think everyone loves when a cat comes onto the screen in a Zoom. So, you know, yes. Kitty is welcome.
Okay, well, she will probably be back. For some reason, she loves anything related to avocado or coconut. Which is,
so what have you got there? Is that coconut?
So this is avocado oil, and then I sometimes use avocado oil and I sometimes use coconut oil for the hot chocolate, but for some reason she loves both of those things.
Maybe she's a Californian at heart, because I was going to say avocado is a very Californian thing.
She really might be. She might be. You know, she's kind of an indoor kitty, so I'm not sure how much she knows about the seasons, but it looks like she's coming back to hang out with us. So, and I'll go ahead and just kind of explain our wet ingredients here. So what you're going to do for the chai base is to just get a store-bought chai tea bag. You can use any brand you want, is really going to be fine. The key, I think, is steeping it overnight if you can, and really just getting a lot of that rich flavor. So you basically are just going to make a cup of chai tea, let it sit, and then we will measure 3/4 of a cup. Well, it's in here. I'll just pour this out a little bit. Okay, let's see. All right, that looks like about 3/4 of a cup. And you do want to make sure that it cools down, because we're going to be adding eggs in here. So if you don't want to put hot tea with your eggs. And then we're going to add 2/3 of a cup of coconut sugar. Now, coconut sugar is lower glycemic, and it maintains some minerals that white refined sugar doesn't have, but it's still not sugar-free. It still will affect your insulin, your blood sugar. So one of the ingredients that I use as a substitute in this book is monk fruit sweetener. It is, you can buy it granulated, and it's a really good one-to-one sub for white sugar. And I'm just gonna let her play with that. And so monk fruit is something that I use in a lot of baked goods and sweets as a substitute if you do need something that is actually going to be essentially sugar-free. So you could just substitute the same amount, or you could substitute the same amount of a regular white sugar. So I'm gonna add that in. That's 2/3 of a cup. And then we're gonna do 2 large eggs and then 1 egg yolk. So we want that because when I was testing this and I was using 3 whole eggs, I found that it was a little bit dry. And when you take out that extra egg white and just save the yolk, it has less drying properties. So you get the richness, a little bit of that richness and that fatty goodness, and a little bit of that binding quality that you'll get from the egg, but you don't have the drying of the white. So I am just gonna basically crack this. We'll do this over a separate bowl. And I am going to let the white just seep through my fingers and then throw our yolk in here, rinse off. And then we will add 1/4 of a cup of avocado oil. Now, you could use a traditional vegetable oil. I prefer avocado oil. It's more heart healthy, in my opinion. Vegetable oils can tend to oxidize quickly, and they're really high in omega-6s. So I do prefer avocado oil. To me, that's a great, for years, I didn't have an answer to what can I use instead of vegetable oil, because olive oil and coconut oil tend to have a flavor. And avocado oil is the answer to that. It is a really high heat, has a really high smoke point. So you don't have to worry about it, getting smoky the way olive oil does. I mean, eventually probably at 500 or so. But I love it. And I think it's great in baking. And a lot of people will ask me, could I use butter? And butter is fabulous in baking, but it's different. It creates a different result. So you really do want to use oil here. And you could definitely, if what you have is vegetable oil, that's fine. I'm not a purist at all. I'm not. So that's all good. And then the last wet ingredient is going to be our vanilla. So I will just add a teaspoon of vanilla extract. I'm going to measure like this because I have a pretty good idea about how much a teaspoon is. Then we will whisk. Here's our whisk. Okay. So then you're just going to whisk up your wet ingredients. And it honestly might look It might look like it's going to be too much for the amount of flour that you have, but it's not. So, and also with this recipe, you really can customize it. If you like the donuts, you can change the spices. You could change the liquid. So instead of chai tea, you could use a milk, you could use a juice, something like that. You could totally change the flavor profile with fruit, really whatever you want to do. You know, maybe the acid in a fruit juice would change it a little bit, but I think it would be negligible and you would still get a really delicious result. But the flour ratio should work pretty well. So, okay, so what was our last cookbook question?
I think we were discussing the difference between just starting out and then the whole second cookbook and the pandemic and what that's been.
So I wrote my second cookbook and it had some different themes like keto friendly. I also include Instant Pot recipes. I got a lot of requests for that. A lot of people telling me their Instant Pot was sitting in their, cupboard from last Christmas. They hadn't done anything with it. So I have some Instant Pot recipes for which there's always a crock pot version as well. And then this kind of, sugar-free substitutes. That's another theme in here that I wanted to share a little bit more of the research I've done. I think monk fruit can be great. I think stevia can be great. So I do a whole scientifically based description of those in the beginning of the book. And yeah, and then I just, kept with some of the same pantry staples. So if you love my first book, you can still, you'll be familiar with a lot of these ingredients. But with each book, because I hope there are more, I plan to include just a few new ingredients just to kind of slowly expand people's pantries, but without it feeling overwhelming. So, they could make some of the recipes that use things like miso paste, for example, as a new ingredient. Or you could still make most of this book if you just decide, I don't feel like adding miso paste to my pantry. There's still a lot of great options for you.
I love it. I love how accessible the recipes are, that, it's mostly ingredients that most people have on hand, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and that's really, really important to me. And I think that particularly, as you said, the book came out at the beginning of April. It's my 6-month book anniversary, and, everything shut down. And I'm grateful to have a business that is largely online, but of course it was disappointing. My entire book tour was canceled. By the way, guys, I'm just whisking this together. And again, it's going to seem like a pretty wet batter at first, but coconut flour has, like I was saying a little bit earlier, it absorbs liquid like crazy. And so it will start to thicken quite a bit because of that coconut flour. So just keep mixing it. And another thing that's great about grain-free baking is you don't have to worry about over mixing because we don't have any gluten. So you don't have to worry about it getting tacky or over mixed or anything like that. So yeah, so we just, had to kind of fly by the seat of our pants like everybody else. And I did some virtual events and shared about some things, did some Instagram lives and all that. But really, it's the wonderful thing about books is that they are evergreen, including cookbooks. I mean, I still buy cookbooks that have been around forever that I'm just discovering. And so, we're treating it like a big long launch that may last a couple years or something like that.
Exactly. Draw out the fun. So actually, due to the pandemic, do you feel like there's been a difference in the recipes or things that people are asking you for? Like a difference, like do they want more comfort foods, or what's that been like?
That's a great question. Yes. So one of the things that I noticed very quickly as I went to make some of the recipes from my book is that a lot of these specialty ingredients like a coconut or almond flour just weren't available, and they are expensive, and they're important for especially if you have some kind of dietary restriction, or the people in my community who have autoimmune diseases and all of that. But I really got a good perspective on how, my wallet was tighter. I think a lot of people's was and is, and I decided that I wanted to continue to make recipes like the ones that are in my book, but I also decided that I wanted to start creating food for a larger community that really needs things that are a little bit less expensive and more accessible. So I also launched something called the Simply Balanced Meal Plan Community, which is it's essentially digital meal plans that I release once per month. But the reason that they're unique is, one, I shop for all of them at Walmart, and we're talking ingredients you can get at any grocery store. The meal plans will make anywhere from 16 to 24 meals for less than $45 for the entire week. And I release them once per month. And the reason that I only release them once per month is because I think in the cooking world, it's interesting to me. By the way, I'm just filling up our silicone donut mold about 2/3 of the way. I think if you're going to be making baked donuts, especially ones that are using gluten-free flours, I would recommend a silicone mold. It just makes life so much easier. So they're not expensive. And then you'll just put a baking sheet underneath. And so we're just going to start filling that up a little bit. So what was I saying? So what I think is really interesting is that we have this idea in life that with most things, we understand that practice makes perfect. I'm gonna grease this actually a little bit and just spray it. And we know that if we want to play an instrument, then we're going to have to practice. But we don't seem to apply that same concept to cooking. We kind of think we are good cooks or we're not good cooks, and that is the way that will be. And we forget that we need to practice cooking as well. And I realized, and I have found, that a lot of cooking stress and anxiety comes from people feeling like they don't actually know what they're doing and they don't actually have basic skills. So the reason I release one new meal plan per month is because they're created with the intention of you practicing them and making them multiple times, so that if for some reason you are in a situation where you're making dinner for your family and you don't have access to something, then you have some sense of proficiency and control in the kitchen. Because there is just a lot we can't control right now, but this is something that we can control, and it's something that we can learn. And so that's what we're doing. We're teaching people to be stressless cooks. And it's been a lot of fun because that is a community who needs those kinds of recipes. And then my sort of traditional LLB community that I absolutely love, who is still really looking for these health and specialty recipes.
So if someone is wanting to make changes in what they've got, like their pantry staples, as you were mentioning before, do you think it's good for them to go whole hog and just sweep all the junk out and replace it? Or are there little changes that you recommend over time?
That is a great question. Now, most people, there are exceptions. There are some people who do well with an all or nothing mentality. That is not most people. I tend to find people do best when you, whoever it is that's instructing them, meets them where they are, meets them halfway. People don't want to feel overwhelmed. They don't want to feel like they have to redo everything immediately. So I would say, start with some small swaps, whether that's, something like the oil. That's an easy swap. Start to get avocado oil instead of vegetable oil, and maybe start to use this coconut sugar instead of the refined sugar, little things like that. But just don't put pressure on yourself. It's okay. Our bodies are resilient. It's not about perfection. There is no such thing. It's about progress and just doing little things better. There's so many little ways to hide veggies in savory dishes, or I think it really comes down to small changes and consistency more than anything.
That sounds good. That's a very comforting mindset, especially as we've discussed that there's so much out of our control, especially right now, that it's nice to think that we can make a small change and just move forward from there. So walk us through a day in your life, because that intro that I gave in the beginning, you are doing so much. So what is it like? You're juggling the website, you're writing, you're constantly developing new recipes, photographing them. Maybe you're thinking about your next book. So how do you get it all done?
I don't know. I'm not I'm not sure. I will say one thing that's really helpful for me is I really work on the mentality of like having to have everything checked off the list. I think if you're in a mindset where it's like, today I will get everything done that's on my list, it can start to feel like, one step forward, two steps back. So I really just try to ask myself, what is the next best thing I can do? What can I check off the list today? There is an overarching system. I would say I wake up and I tend to do more administrative things in the morning if I need to, or editing, writing things out, writing a recipe, editing a recipe, answering emails. That seems to work best for me in the morning when my brain is working the best. And then really the afternoons are when I will usually start cooking and spend some time cooking and doing photography. The photography though is very light dependent. So I do, depending on the season, have to kind of work backwards in my day, especially when I wrote the books. I really, really had to think about timing because once everything is ready and it's decorated and it's good to go, you have to get the shot or you have to start all over. So I would definitely be watching the light and figuring out when the golden hour was. And I can't believe how quickly we've gone from summer to fall lighting. So I've definitely had to change my tune a little bit with that. Okay, so we have our donuts here. And I will say again, it's really important not to overfill them. It's tempting to overfill them, but it's almost gonna they're about 2/3 of the way up, and that's really what you want. So we're gonna throw them in a 350-degree oven for about 22 minutes. So I'll get those in.
They look so good already. They're not even baked and they look delicious.
Well, and I went ahead and made some so that you guys can see the finished result. So kind of hold one up. So this is what they look like. And I actually decided, in the book, I use coconut butter as icing, which you can usually find it at Whole Foods or specialty stores. But again, it's, can be harder to find, can be a little bit expensive. So for this, I just did a cinnamon and monk fruit mixture and just put a little bit of cinnamon. It's right here, a little bit of cinnamon, a little bit of monk fruit. I could have used more of the coconut sugar. You could use white sugar, that's fine. And then just dipped them in. And so you get a little bit of the crunch as well, which is a nice alternative. And you can see, they obviously don't look like a big fluffy yeast donut, but I think they look like a really lovely fall cake donut. And I actually am a huge cake donut fan. They're really, really moist and tender, but they do hold together really well. So they're awesome. They're awesome with a cup of coffee or with hot chocolate that we're about to make.
I know, I can't wait to see that. And yes, I'm on team cake donut all the way. My husband likes the yeasty one. I'm like, no. So
donut person, yeah.
The recipes you're making tonight are so comforting looking. So out of all the recipes you created, is there one that's like your ultimate comfort that you just keep going back to over and over?
Ooh, that is such a good question. Yeah, there are definitely a few. So in this book, I have absolutely loved. It's a little bit of a labor of love, but the chicken parm is really, really yummy and really satisfying. And I will say it makes a ton of food. So that's really good. I do love my veggie burger in here. I think it's hard to make a veggie burger that's super flavorful that actually really holds together. And there's just something about biting into a burger that I love. And then there's also a apple cinnamon sausage breakfast bake. And that was definitely one of my favorites as well. And just really sliceable and freezer friendly. So yeah, but they're all my babies to some extent. So I'm gonna bring y'all a little closer to the stove here. And just see a little bit more of what I'm gonna be doing over there. And hello. So, okay, so now I'm going to show you how to make what I call my crash-free hot chocolate because it doesn't have a lot. We're going to do a little bit of maple syrup, but there's not a lot of sugar in it. You could substitute the maple syrup for stevia or for monk fruit if you did want a sugar-free option, but it's just really, really cozy and comforting. And we blend it in an actual blender so it's frothy and creamy. And another thing you can do is you can substitute some of the milk that we're going to heat up for coffee. And so you can make kind of a mocha situation, which is really wonderful.
That sounds so good.
Yeah, and especially right now, although, you know, if you're somewhere that's warmer, you can ice this. You can just go ahead, make it, blend it, and then you can refrigerate it and pour it over ice in the morning. And it's really yummy that way as well.
Yeah, as we were talking just before we started this, that here in Southern California, we're still experiencing summer, and we'll probably experience summer until about December.
Yeah.
But we have strong drive here to just make fall happen for ourselves, even if the weather doesn't cooperate. So I bet a lot of our Mission Viejo viewers are going to make this hot, but it's great to know that it can be iced too.
Yeah, both ways. So I will, and actually one of the key ingredients, so a woman who is on my team, she has just been like there with me from early on. It was her idea actually to add a little bit of starch into this. And that actually helps thicken it up. That's something that I use a lot, especially with a dairy-free option or a gluten-free option, it can really help thicken. So, okay, so what we're gonna do is take your little pot. This is a small saucepan. I would say use anywhere from 2 to 4 quarts is probably good if you have that. And then I added a 1/4 cup of full fat canned coconut milk and 1 1/4 cups of almond milk. So a little bit of the creaminess of the coconut milk, and then just a little bit more of the volume of the almond milk. So we will heat that up. Let's see, get that going. There we go. And we don't want to bring this to a boil because we don't want any of it to kind of get funky at the top, kind of a curdle situation. We just want it to simmer a little bit. And then we can go ahead and start adding the rest of our ingredients to our blender. You can use any kind of blender that you want. And I will show you what we have here, a little bit of a mixture of a tablespoon of chocolate chips. So by the way, I've also made this with white chocolate chips, which was really fabulous. So a tablespoon of chocolate chips and then a tablespoon of cocoa powder. Now, when it comes to cocoa powder, I personally like Dutch processed cocoa powder. So it will say Dutch processed or it will say processed with an alkali. And so what that does is the alkali process actually takes away some of the acidity and it makes it a little bit more sweet and mild and that kind of thing. So I personally love to use that. I think it makes a difference. And then a 1/4 teaspoon of any kind of starch. I use arrowroot starch, but cornstarch is easier to find. And then just a touch of that vanilla that I'm just free-handing. Just a tiny, tiny bit of vanilla. And then a tablespoon of maple syrup. Add that in. Again, really whatever sweetener you want. And then, let's see, I'll show you. Not much to see, but, and then, now the recipe calls for coconut oil, and that really helps with the creaminess, but I'm feeling wild and crazy, so I'm gonna grab butter.
Woo!
So, I am going to add a tablespoon of butter. Now, if you are somebody who's done kind of a keto thing, you might be familiar with this idea of like a bulletproof coffee. That's kind of the same idea as this higher fat, lower carb. If you did really care about that part of it, you would just substitute the maple syrup for a stevia or something that's sugar-free. And then you add a little bit of the butter and that makes it really creamy. And part of the reason I do this too is because I used to be like a big breakfast person and I love breakfast, but usually for me, I want it a little bit later in the day, like more of like almost like a brunchy type of thing. And so I'm literally adding this butter to here. Fat is our friend. Fat is our friend. It is not bad for you. It's important to eat fat, especially for women. And it can really keep you satisfied, which can really help with, you know, overall just figuring out your hunger hormones and feeling like feeling like you're satiated after your meals. So we definitely don't need to be afraid of fat. But I tended to find that I wasn't super hungry for a full meal until something like 10:30, 11, but I did want something to kind of sip on. And even for things like just energy and digestion, having some kind of a nutrient-rich, nutrient-dense drink that you can just kind of sip on. And that it's just a wonderful way to start the day. And I think that's part of the reason people seem to love the Bulletproof coffee. So this can be a little bit of an alternative, especially if you do need something that's going to be lower in caffeine. So just going to move this over. And do we have any last questions?
We have from the audience. I'm going to interrupt real quick because we had a substitution question when we were talking about stuff.
Absolutely.
So first we have a hello from Sandria from San Francisco. So she's saying hello.
Hi.
And then Sarah Stimson, she says her baker daughter is listening in the background and suddenly piped up with, can you use the avocado oil and coconut sugar as a substitute in any recipe? And what was the flour substitute?
So I would want clarification on what you would substitute them for, like what she's asking if avocado oil can be substituted for. So I would say if a recipe calls for an oil, then you could substitute avocado oil. I wouldn't substitute avocado oil for butter because they do behave a little bit different, a little bit differently in terms of chemistry. So I would say you can use the avocado oil anywhere where there's a vegetable oil, canola oils, coconut oil, but not for butter. And then the coconut sugar, you can substitute pretty close to 1-to-1 for white sugar. It's a little bit less sweet than white sugar. So it will work, but it will just be a little bit less sweet. Now you could add a little bit more of the coconut sugar, but then you might be playing with the ratios a little bit. So you definitely can, but you won't have quite as sweet of a result. The other thing too is most of the baking that I do doesn't require super specific chemistry, but technically coconut sugar does have more moisture in it than white sugar. So it could affect, if it's a really specific recipe, the moisture in the coconut sugar could in theory change a little bit based off of just in terms of the white sugar itself. And then flour substitutes, ooh, those are hard. Flour substitutes are hard. You know, almond flour and coconut flour don't really behave like anything else, especially coconut flour. It is a crazy flour. I mean, the amount of liquid it absorbs, if you put a cup of coconut flour, so if you have a recipe that calls for a cup of white flour, traditional white flour, and you instead use a cup of coconut flour, you will have a ball of dough. Like it will literally clump up into a ball and you will have to flatten it out into a pizza or something. So you would probably use something like 1/3 of a cup of coconut flour in place of 1 whole cup of regular flour. So it's tricky and you definitely have to play around with it, which is really fun to do. Almond flour can sometimes substitute for 1-to-1 for white flour, depending on the recipe. But
and tonight you used avocado. I mean, tonight you used almond. Is that?
Almond flour is what I used tonight.
Okay.
Exactly. So, okay, so it looks like our milk is almost heated up. Let's test it. Yeah, it's just got some small bubbles. So I'm going to go ahead and we're just going to pour this carefully into the blender. And it's already melting our chocolate. And then just put our lid on. Always make sure you are using proper blender etiquette, especially if you're making something hot. You want to make sure it's on the lowest setting and you want to make sure you're holding something with a dish towel. That is the biggest mistake I made in culinary school. I got through 11-month program culinary school. Didn't hurt myself, didn't cut my finger off. I'm kind of a clumsy person, so that was pretty surprising. And we had to serve a 40-person brunch for graduation. And I had a hot soup explode all over me on that day. And it was bad. It was a bad situation. All right, give this little blend. And it usually doesn't take a lot to blend because that warm milk has kind of helped melted everything. And that is it. And then you'll just pour it into whatever mug or you're using, or your Yeti if you're running around like me. I do that a lot. And you can enjoy it. You can see it's really, really frothy and creamy. It's just really wonderful.
Oh, That looks
Well,
amazing.
when you were talking about soups, we happen to have a question from Lulu, and she would like you to talk about your soups and salads. They're so tasty, easy, and different.
Thank you. That's so nice. Yeah, so just in general, kind of the way that I think about soups and salads is I am a hearty food kind of girl. I don't typically crave things that are sort of traditionally really healthy. And I think that's a lot of my catalyst for just getting creative. So when it comes to soups, I like things that tend to be, even if it's broth based, like creamy, hearty, chunky, all of that. And so the key with soups is if you're going to be making a soup on your own, you have to layer flavor. Like you have to start from the base and really caramelize those flavors and really think about how you're building it. If you just dump everything in a pot, you're probably not going to get a lot of flavor. And then I always have a sort of a mental trifecta of you have your broth and then some kind of a protein and then some vegetable. And that will ultimately sort of be the foundational combination. But even in my broth-based soups, I want lots of veggies. Maybe I'll throw some noodles in there, some chickpeas, some sausage, whatever it is. And then it's great to have that with a nice salad. And again, with salads, I want them to have lots of fun components. And I also like to think about what are the different palettes, someone who wants a more traditional salad, someone who might be a little bit more adventurous and creative, different times of the year, what's seasonal, and just kind of synthesize that. So when people are going through the chapters of my book, I want everyone to be able to say, that's what I would want, find something that really speaks to them.
I love that. Well, actually I have one more question for you, and it is related to what you said about like not naturally gravitating towards healthy food. I don't know if any of us really do.
Exactly.
I love that your recipes are healthy, but they're still really delicious and hearty. And I love the angle that your hometown of Nashville has really inspired a lot of your cooking. So can you tell us a little bit about what you love about Southern cooking, and also just take a moment to talk up Nashville, because a lot of us can't be doing a lot of travel right now. We're here in Southern California. I've never been to Nashville. So take me on a trip.
Oh my gosh, yes. So there's traditional Southern cooking, which I think people might be a little bit more familiar with, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, collard greens, and that's all wonderful. And I do have a vegan collard green recipe in this book that I love. I think it's really nice. I think it's really yummy. I tried some collards that had some tomato in them, and that was new to me, and I loved that addition. So those recipes are absolutely wonderful. And I don't want a South where we don't have those good old fried foods, but there's so much history in the South, and so much Southern cuisine that is not what people think of, even, that's a little bit fresher and that is more produce based, and that, there's just really just wonderful seasonal things that you don't have to do much to. So, the South there's something really I guess transient and whimsical in the fact that we have seasons and they come and go, and we don't get access to everything. We get it when we get it, and it's perfect at its height, and then it's gone. And we don't always have the same abundance as other places, but what we have is really special. So I definitely try to incorporate those things throughout the year, to incorporate our corn and our tomatoes and sweet potatoes and our hearty greens in the fall, but it can be light and it can be fresh and not necessarily heavy the way that we think of traditional Southern food. So I love it. And then Nashville itself is, it is just, first of all, it's just an incredible quality of life here. I think it's a super supportive city. I find it to be incredibly supportive of entrepreneurs. It's not a dog eat dog world at all. And yeah, it's just people are gentle, people really are kind, but it has a little bit of attitude, unlike some of the rest of the South, I think is a little bit sleepier. Nashville definitely has an urban component. And so we have amazing food. We now have chefs coming from all over the country to open restaurants here and doing all sorts of creative things. And it's been a blast to watch them do that and really put their spin on it. But what's funny about Nashville, and I think anyone would have a blast being here, and I'm more than happy to recommend things. Probably not, we're not there yet, but hopefully soon. But what's interesting about Nashville is that when new restaurants open, people can sniff out someone who doesn't get it and doesn't get Nashville. And you can't bring your city to Nashville. You have to bring a little bit of what you know, and then you have to infuse Nashville into it. And so people know, and things they don't stay alive if they don't really incorporate our culture into it.
That is so interesting. Well,
I was just going to say, maybe that's super interesting.
I know, I love it. Well, we all love where we live, right? So I love that there's such a sense of community and, sense of place. That's really cool. So, okay, you sold me. I want to go to Nashville now.
Yeah.
Whenever we can travel again, right?
Absolutely. Love to see you both there.
Absolutely. Well, that's it from the Sandra just said she loves blended treats, so she was happy to see the blended treat.
Oh, good. It makes it so much easier. Just throw it in there.
Yeah. So are we done with our demos? Are we?
Yeah, I think we're done. Donuts come out, but we have our finished product, and they do freeze really well. So if you do want to freeze some, y'all can definitely freeze them for a couple months.
Fantastic.
I feel like they would never make it to the freezer.
I feel like I haven't done my job. They make it to the freezer, but just saying.
Exactly.
It's good to know, just in case.
So, Allison, for Mission Viejo Library, is it missionviejolibrary.com? Is that how people find out what's the latest and greatest and like with hours and all of that stuff? Is that how?
Yeah, our website is actually cmvl.org, and that's like a very difficult acronym that stands for City of Mission Viejo Library. So if folks just Google us, we're the first result, so they can find us that way. And then it's facebook.com/Mission Viejo Library. So we hope everyone watching is already following us or will follow us, because we've always got something fun going on in Mission Viejo.
You do. You guys have great programming at your library there. And then Warwick's is just warwicks.com. We have also a wonderful events program. I've been doing tons. This is, I think, my third or fourth event today. So it's been a good day. Wow. So this virtual world lets you do that. In the old world, you could only do one event a day. So it's really kind of fun being able to do more than one. And Laura, what's the best way for everybody to get in touch with you and to watch you?
Yeah, so Instagram, if you're on Instagram, I'm there a lot at Laura Lee Balanced. And then my website is llbalanced.com, and that will also take you to my meal plans and my books and everything I have going on.
Excellent. Well, I think that's it for the evening. You got a thank you from Steve, and thanking all of us for putting it together, and everybody is saying thank you. So this was wonderful. So thank you, and I will take us off of Facebook Live.
Good.
So good night, everybody.
Thank you all so much. Appreciate it. Good night.
Good night. Okay.